AITA for not getting involved when my wife got into an argument with my older sister? So right now I am in the doghouse. My wife and I have been together for 10 years and the circumstances surrounding our wedding led to my being estranged from my parents as they were not accepting of my wife being from another race. For about 5 years we had no communication with my side of the family. When lockdown hit, my dad reached out. He was remorseful for how things went down between us and invited us to spend some time with him and the rest of the family as an olive branch. My wife was happy that I was in communication with my parents again, but she expressed that she did not feel comfortable traveling to the other side of the country to spend a month with them this summer. She offered to only stay for 1 week in an Airbnb using work, she's a remote worker, as an excuse for why she could not stay longer. I managed to convince her to stay for 2 weeks and not in an Airbnb but in my older sister's condo as she had a spare bedroom. My dad was welcoming to my wife, it was like she was one of his own kids. The problem was my older sister. My wife is very organized and neat, she's a VP for a tech startup, so I know she is quite busy and relies on her calendar almost religiously. My sister is not, so she would end up scheduling and planning things during the work week, which I know was stressful for my wife. This is also a new role for her and she was frustrated at having to leave her WFH setup and work out of her laptop for 2 weeks. One day my sister lost her temper at my wife, called her a child and accused her of sabotaging the trip. She said this because my wife stepped away to take a work call and had to leave early due to limited Wi-Fi. My wife kept silent, which I commend her for, and all she did say was, "It's nice to know how you really feel about me, don't worry, I'm leaving." Our drive back was awkward, and when we got back to my sister's condo my wife packed her bags and said that she couldn't stay in a place she wasn't wanted. She also exploded on me saying that I did not defend her and called my family racist. This angered me as my family is South Asian and are honestly doing their best, and to call them racist without seeing the improvement on their end shows that my wife never let go of her grudge. I convinced her to stay and my sister apologized and my wife left after her 2 weeks were up, but now that I am home I am getting the silent treatment. I tried to talk to her, all she had to say was that she needed time to re-evaluate whether her needs are being met in this marriage and that she was disappointed in me and could see that when it comes to my family I will never have her back. Why I might be taught. I was quiet when my sister ranted about my wife and said she was better than her due to her job and that she was a child who had it easy because she got married early. But I was only quiet because I knew my sister was wrong and would regret this. No point of getting angry and then making my sister feel ganged up on. Comment. Your poor wife traveling all the way there and getting treated that way. After what your family put her through, and now she doesn't even have a partner who's man enough to stand up for her. I'm really hoping this opens her eyes and she at least considers separating from you until you can grow up and actually be a real partner. Your wife should never have to defend herself against your family. You should always step in for her. That's how it works. She definitely should be re-evaluating your marriage. It's hard enough marrying into a family that hates you for no reason, but the marriage would never work if your spouse doesn't have your back. Look up, your wife has put you on notice, she's evaluating whether her needs are being met. Based on what you wrote in the post and comments, your wife is telling you she does not feel heard in your marriage. She works. She is focused on her career and yet was willing to spend 1 week with you and your family after 5 years NC. But you pushed for 2. She wanted her own space, but you pushed her to agree to stay at your sister's condo instead of an Airbnb. After being disrespected by your sister, she wanted to leave. But you convinced wife to stay. It was decent of your sister to apologize, but your wife gets to decide what, if any, relationship she wants with sister. You can have whatever relationship you want with your family, and your wife has said as much per your post. You are the off for not listening to your wife, for pushing her to do what you want, and then invalidating her feelings after your sister behaved poorly. I too card you and pray you chose divorce over marriage counseling so I could find a partner who actually listens when I talk and has the capacity and emotional IQ to consider things from my perspective, not just his own. Your wife was taking a big step by allowing your racist family back into her life. Your first mistake was pressuring your wife to stay for longer than she was comfortable with and not respecting her desire to stay at a neutral location. Your wife communicated to you that she had work obligations, yet you failed to stand up for her when your sister gave her a hard time for needing to do her work. You are expecting your wife to acknowledge that your family had changed, but the first time she interacts with them a member of your family treats her badly and you fail to step up. The point was not to gang up on your sister, but to make your wife feel supported when she has put herself in a vulnerable position for your benefit. You ignored your wife's attempts at creating a safe space for herself from your previously racist family at an Airbnb, and you shot that down. She also tried to set a time limit, which you also ignored. Then you silently watched her be screamed at and humiliated by your sister. Now you're feeling like the victim. Look, sincerely, you're very wrong in this situation. You should be on your knees begging for her forgiveness, but I can see you are blind in the comments. You're missing the point of your wife's recent words. She has just gotten a glimpse of her shiny future. Now she gets to decide if this is what she wants, and buddy, nobody would want this. I appreciate that you want to move on, but accountability is still to be had. You can't pretend there's no racist anything towards your wife if this split your family up for 5 years. I don't buy that. So it's okay to let your wife feel ganged up on? This statement shows that you place more value on your sister, who was clearly out of line, than your wife. This is likely what your wife is referring to when she says that, when it comes to my family I will never have her back. You owe your wife huge apology. Which may not be enough but is a start. This situation is above Reddit's pay grade. I would suggest counseling and see if that makes your wife feel better about staying in your marriage. I'm a huge fan of people doing all they can to stay together, but not being your spouse's advocate and sticking up for her in situations like this is a deal breaker for many. Good luck to you. You also need to step back and ask your wife how the trip was for her. Were there small microaggressions you just didn't notice? Not sure if wife's race, but were terms used you may not have recognized. Did your sister call your wife uppity? Not just that she thought she was too good for them and better than them with her job? You need to listen to your wife's experience. You effed up by not stepping into the fight to tell your sister to back off as your wife was disrupting her work routine and trying to accommodate her work with the lack of planning my family. You went from NC to forcing your wife to stay in a potentially hostile environment. She had to stay on alert the whole time because she didn't know how the situation might turn, and when it did you didn't immediately back her, so she felt alone in a hostile situation. Let her tell you how the trip went for her, not tell her how the trip went well. Your family is racist. You really want your wife to pat them on the back for their alleged progress? She's supposed to make them feel better about their racism because they are no longer expressing it to her? I wouldn't even ask my wife to see my family again after that. I wouldn't ever put her in that position. Your spouse is supposed to be the family you chose, but apparently your wife comes in second place to your awful, racist family. I'm very glad she's reevaluating this relationship. She deserves so much better. She tried to compromise by spending a week there, in an Airbnb. You managed to convince her to stay for 2 weeks and not in an Airbnb, but at your older sister's condo. You know this was stressful for your wife when your sister refused to respect the fact that your wife was working during this time period and kept scheduling stuff which interfered with her work. And then your sister confronted your wife for sabotaging this trip, because your wife was working? Your family is honestly doing their best? To do what, exactly? Destroy your marriage? Good on your wife for reevaluating whether or not this is a marriage she wants to stay in. You did not have her back and she knows it? Do you know a divorce attorney, because you probably will need one? And your reason why are spineless. Next story 2. AITA for pointing out the injustice in someone's divorce expectations. My girlfriend's cousin, J, is getting divorced from the husband, H, she married in secret a few years ago. It was never the match made in heaven and their divorce is not exactly a surprise. They both live in the house that he owns, and which he owned for some time before they got married. A few years in, they started to experience problems in their marriage, and J bought a house in her own name, ostensibly to rent out, but as time went on, it became apparent that she had one eye on moving into it. When she went to the solicitors to sign the contract for it, her husband H went with her. The solicitor then started to talk about making a will, and the subject of the house that H owned, and in which they both lived, came up. H piped up that it's his house, and J wouldn't be entitled to a share of it, which evidently shocked J. The solicitor, bearing in mind this is UK law, pointed out that by virtue of the fact J and H were married, she would indeed be entitled to a share of it. This caused an argument when H doubled down on this and reiterated to the solicitor that he bought the house before he married J and therefore expected to retain the entire interest in it. The solicitor insisted that the fact they are married means she is. H continued to disagree and said he would fight her for it if necessary. Apparently J cried all the way home, and his selfishness effectively decided that there was no way back, and that a divorce had to happen. Jay was recounting this tale to us from the point of view that she fully expected to take him for half his house, yet she also fully expected to retain all the ownership of the house she had just bought. This is where I pointed out, like the solicitor, that as she is married, she would indeed be entitled to half of his house, but that also means he would be entitled to half of hers. In other words, if she expects to get half his house, then she must also expect to surrender half of hers to him. She was appalled by this, and disagreed with it, for some reason. I pointed out that law is the law, and that it applies to both sexes. Why should the man have to give up half his house, yet the woman would not? Of course, I became the villain of the piece, and not only did Jay shout me down, but so did my girlfriend and my mill, telling me that I was wrong. I then pointed out that if I was wrong, then so was Jay's solicitor. Comment. Dear God. They didn't want logic, they wanted you to agree. Even if you had too much integrity to lie, you should have had enough sense to keep quiet and sympathize. You are NTA. Your sanity, however, is far from certain. They just didn't like what you said, it doesn't go with their narrative. Unfortunately for them, just because they don't like it doesn't make it untrue. Your friends should appreciate you more for not blindly, and stupidly, agreeing with her, because she is obviously in the wrong. Jay's way too entitled, she's crying about his selfishness but she wants to do the same. And gets mad when you point out the hypocrisy? She sounds very childish. Here's a lesson, stay out of other people's legal problems. Let the lawyers deal with it. Just say yeah that sucks or some other sympathetic sounding platitude and stay out of it.